The sky over Willow Creek was steel gray, like it had forgotten how to shine. Cold wind rattled the rusted sign above Benny's Diner, where coffee refills were still a dime and the pie was older than some of the regulars. On the bench out front, under a frayed army-issue coat, slumped a man most folks had stopped noticing years ago. His name was Hank Whitaker. 68. Wrinkled like a paper bag, with silver stubble clinging to his jaw and hands that shook when he thought no one was watching. To the townsfolk, Hank was just that homeless guy, the one who muttered to himself and fed the crows crusts of old bread. But once, decades ago, Hank had a wife, a son, a house with yellow shutters and a flag on the porch. He'd worn a uniform with pride, served in Vietnam, come home to start a life from scratch. But somewhere along the way, between lost jobs and lost chances, grief carved him hollow. By the time his son turned 18, they weren't speaking. By the time his wife died, Hank didn't know how to grieve, only how to vanish. Now, Willow Creek was his graveyard of memories. Every crack in the sidewalk held a ghost. Every warm light behind a window reminded him of all he'd lost. Then came the day she stopped. Not just walked past him, but stopped. A woman in a navy coat, holding a leather satchel and a look that said she saw through him. Not past. Through. "Sir," she said gently, "are you Hank Whitaker?" And in that moment a storm began to stir, one that would turn the ashes of Hank's life into something no one in Willow Creek would believe. Hank blinked. The wind tugged at her coat, but she didn't flinch. Her hair was tucked into a tight bun, and her eyes, clear, blue, and serious, didn't waver from his. "Yeah," he croaked. His voice was hoarse from years of silence and sleeping in the cold. "Who's asking?" She knelt to his level, brushing flecks of dust from the bench before sitting beside him. Nobody had sat next to Hank in over 10 years. "My name is Claire Donovan. I'm an attorney." That word hit him like a slap. Hank instinctively pulled his coat tighter, as if it might shield him from whatever bad news she was about to bring. "I'm not here to hurt you," she added quickly. "I was hired to find you. It's taken me over a year. You're not exactly listed in the yellow pages. Don't have a phone," he muttered. "Or a home. Or a reason anyone should be looking for me." Claire's expression softened. "You have a son, Mr. Whitaker. A son who's been trying to find you." Hank flinched. The name burned behind his eyes, Michael. The boy he left behind with more silence than goodbye. "Don't have a son," Hank growled. "Not anymore." But Claire opened her satchel anyway. Inside was a photo, faded but familiar. A little boy in Little League gear, gap-toothed and proud, standing next to a younger version of Hank. "He's alive. And he's not a boy anymore. He's 43, Mr. Whitaker. He's built something. And he wants to see you." The wind howled through the trees. For the first time in years, Hank didn't feel cold. He felt something else. Fear. Because second chances, he'd always believed, were for other people. Claire waited, letting the silence hang like mist between them. "I ain't going," Hank muttered finally. "He don't need me messing up his life now." She didn't press. She just sat, glancing once more at the photo in her hand before tucking it back into the satchel. "Your son doesn't want anything from you," she said gently. "He just wants to talk. To know you're alive. Maybe see if there's anything left to rebuild." Hank turned away. "That bridge burned a long time ago. Then maybe it's time to build a new one." Those words echoed in his ears long after Claire walked away, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. She left a card tucked under the chip thermos by his side. "Claire Donovan, attorney at law. Boston. On the back, please call me. Michael asked me to." That night, the crows didn't come. Instead, Hank found himself staring at the stars from his usual place behind the diner. He remembered holding Michael's bike seat, running down the gravel road, yelling, "Keep going, kiddo! You're doing it!" He remembered the slam of the front door when Michael was 16, shouting things no father should hear, because Hank had been too drunk, too angry, too lost to be a father anymore. He remembered never saying sorry. By morning, the card was still in his pocket. Unbent. The first step was always the hardest. He hadn't taken one in years. But somewhere deep inside, a part of him whispered, what if he meant it? What if he really wants to see you? And so, Hank stood, wobbly, slow, but upright, for the first time in a long time, with nothing but a beat-up duffel, the clothes on his back, and a scrap of hope. The bus station in Willow Creek hadn't changed since 1979. Same cracked linoleum floors. Same vending machine with buttons that stuck. Hank stood near the counter, shifting from foot to foot, hat in hand like a man waiting for judgment. The woman behind the glass looked up. Where to? Hank hesitated. The words felt foreign in his mouth. Boston. She raised an eyebrow. One way? He nodded. He paid with crumpled bills and coins collected from years of sweeping behind the diner and the charity of strangers. When she handed him the ticket, his hands trembled. This tiny slip of paper held more weight than any he'd carried in Vietnam. The ride was long. Trees blurred past like memories, and every bump in the road rattled something loose in his chest. He dozed off once, jolting awake to the sound of children laughing at the back of the bus. For a moment he thought he heard Michael's voice. Daddy, look! But it vanished like smoke. At a rest stop in Pennsylvania, Hank stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The man looking back was older, worn, with eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little. He splashed cold water on his face and whispered, You don't deserve this. But part of him, the smallest part, whispered back, Maybe you do. Maybe we all do once. When the bus finally pulled into Boston the next morning, dawn was breaking. The city stretched before him like something out of a dream, clean, loud, fast. It smelled of coffee, ambition, and new chances. And standing on the curb, coat wrapped tight against the cold, was Claire. She smiled when she saw him, like she'd been waiting for this moment a long time. Ready? She asked. Hank swallowed hard. Hell no, he said. But let's go anyway. Claire's car was small but warm, filled with the faint scent of lavender and leather. Hank sat stiffly in the passenger seat, hands clenched in his lap. He watched the city pass in blurs of motion. Glass towers, street musicians, mothers rushing children across intersections. How long's he been here? Hank asked finally, eyes fixed on the road. 20 years, Claire replied. Started with a food truck, believe it or not. Now he owns a chain. Restaurants all across the Northeast. Even a foundation. Hank shook his head. Can't picture him grown up. Claire smiled. He's still got your eyes. That silenced Hank. They pulled into a parking garage beneath a tall building downtown, sleek, all steel and light. The kind of place Hank never imagined entering unless he was cleaning the floors. Claire led him through marble hallways into a private elevator, scanning a key card. On the 21st floor, the doors slid open to reveal a modern office. Wide windows overlooking the Charles River, hardwood floors, soft music playing from hidden speakers. It was too quiet, too clean. It smelled like success and espresso. Wait here, Claire said. He's just finishing a meeting. Hank stood near a potted plant, feeling about as out of place as a scarecrow at a wedding. He glanced at the photos on the wall, framed newspaper articles, magazine covers. One in particular caught his eye. Michael Whitaker, From the Streets to the Stars. His son's face was sharper now, broad shoulders, confident smile, but the eyes, those were his mother's. Soft, thoughtful, kind. Hank turned away, afraid. But just then, the door opened. And there he was. Michael. Older. Taller. Steadier. Wearing a navy blazer and jeans. A man who looked like he carried the weight of something bigger than himself. They stared at each other for a long time. Neither spoke. Until Michael whispered, almost to himself, I didn't think you'd come. And Hank, his voice breaking for the first time in years, replied, I almost didn't. Michael crossed the room slowly, as if approaching a wild animal. Hank stood motionless, hands trembling at his sides, his eyes scanning his son like a map he once knew by heart but hadn't seen in decades. Damn, Michael said softly, voice tight. You look older. Hank chuckled dryly. Life'll do that to ya. They stood less than 2 feet apart. The silence between them wasn't just awkward, it was sacred, heavy with things left unsaid. Hank glanced down at his worn-out boots. Last time I saw you, you were taller in your baseball bat. Now you're… Michael raised an eyebrow. Running a company? No, Hank said. Now you're a man. A real one. Michael swallowed hard and looked away toward the skyline. I used to look for you, you know. Every city I went to. Every alley, every park. I'd see someone in a crowd and think, maybe that's him. Maybe today's the day. Hank's eyes filled. Why? Because you were my dad. Because I hated you. And because I still loved you. All at once. Hank lowered himself slowly into a leather chair, suddenly feeling the years crash down on him like a wave. I messed up. Your mother, you. I should have done better. I should have stayed. Michael was quiet, his jaw tightening. She died alone. I know. I had to bury her by myself. I know that too. Hank's voice broke. I thought I'd lost the right to come back. Michael turned then, really turned, and looked at his father not as a ghost, but as a man. Worn. Wounded. Human. You did, Michael said, not harshly, but honestly. But sometimes, the right thing isn't about what you deserve. It's about what you're still willing to fight for. Hank nodded slowly, wiping at his eyes. Then I'm here to fight, son. If you'll let me. Michael didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to a cabinet behind his desk and poured 2 cups of coffee from a silver carafe. He handed one to Hank, who took it with both hands like it was a sacred offering. Smells like a memory, Hank muttered. Michael half smiled. Mom used to say you couldn't fix a bad morning, but you could survive it with coffee. Smart woman, Hank said, voice quiet. They sat across from each other at a small round table near the window. The city shimmered beneath them, but neither man looked out. So, what have you been doing all these years? Michael asked. Hank stared into his cup. Surviving. Slept in shelters, worked odd jobs, drifted. Lost a lot of me along the way. Why didn't you ever reach out? I was ashamed. After your mama passed, I couldn't bear to see you, not when I was like that. You deserve better than a drunk with no future. Michael studied him carefully. You weren't always like that. No, Hank agreed. But sometimes we fall so far, we forget who we were before the fall. There was a pause, then Michael leaned forward. Do you remember the time you took me fishing, out on the lake behind Grandma's place? Hank's lips curved into a soft smile. Your line got tangled in a tree. You cried so hard I had to carry you back with the rod dragging behind us. You told me real men cry, Michael said. I still believe that. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, fragile but real. Not forgiveness, not yet. But the beginning of it. You hungry? Michael asked. Hank blinked, surprised by the question. I could eat, he said quietly. Michael stood. Let's get lunch. My treat. There's a diner downstairs that does meatloaf like Mom used to make. And just like that, 2 strangers who shared blood but not years walked side by side, down the hall towards something neither of them had known in a long time. A second chance. The diner was tucked into the base of Michael's building, polished chrome, checkered tile floors, and red leather booths that gave it a 1960s charm. It smelled like butter and onions, and the waitresses wore their hair in buns with pens tucked behind their ears. As they slid into a cornered booth, Hank ran his hand over the table's formica surface. Place like this reminds me of your mother. She used to love diners. Said they felt honest. Michael smiled. She used to steal the little creamers. she'd dump him in her purse like treasure. Hank chuckled. Said they were for emergencies. They both laughed softly. Different men, different lives. But in that moment, connected by the ghost of a woman who had loved them both deeply, if not perfectly. The waitress arrived, smiling politely. "What can I get you folks?" Michael answered first. 2 meatloafs, mashed potatoes, extra gravy, and a slice of cherry pie split. Hank raised an eyebrow. "You remember?" "I remember everything," Michael said. The waitress left, and the silence settled in again. But it was warmer now, like a blanket instead of a wall. "I don't expect this to be easy," Hank said, fiddling with a sugar packet. "I don't even expect you to forgive me. But I want to try. I want to be something again." Michael nodded slowly. "I'm not sure what that looks like yet." "Me neither," Hank admitted. "But I'll show up. Every day. However you'll have me." Their food arrived, steaming plates of nostalgia, and they dug in quietly. Halfway through, Hank looked up. "I read once that family isn't about perfection. It's about persistence." Michael nodded. "Then maybe we still have a shot." Outside, the city moved on without them. But in that little booth, over mashed potatoes and memories, a broken bridge was slowly being rebuilt, one bite, one word, one breath at a time. Later that afternoon, back in Michael's office, the sunlight slanted through the tall windows, casting long shadows over the floor. Hank stood near the glass, gazing out at the river like it might whisper something he'd forgotten. Michael watched him from his desk, fingers steepled. "You don't have anywhere to stay, do you?" Hank shook his head slowly. "Been making do for a long time. Didn't plan this far ahead." Michael stood and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a small stack of papers and a set of keys. "I have an apartment. It's not much, used to belong to my head chef before he moved out to the suburbs. It's furnished, quiet. Heat works." Hank turned to him, cautious. "You offering me a place?" Michael nodded. "Not charity. A clean bed, a roof, and a bit of dignity, if you're ready to take it." The old man hesitated, pride and shame wrestling beneath his tattered coat. He rubbed the back of his neck, looked down at his boots. "Why are you doing this, Michael? After everything I did, or didn't do?" Michael's voice was steady. "Because when I was 10, you built me a wooden rocket ship out of scrap. Said I could reach the stars if I held on tight. I've spent the last 30 years doing just that, building, pushing, believing. And no matter how angry I was, you were the first person who taught me to dream." The room fell silent. Finally, Hank took the keys. His fingers shook. "I'll pay you back," he muttered. Michael smiled. "You already started." As they left the building, the wind was colder, but Hank felt warmer. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in decades, he had a key in his pocket. And hope in his heart. The apartment was modest but clean. Soft sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, casting gentle patterns on the worn hardwood floors. It smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old books. Hank stood in the middle of the living room, the echo of his footsteps unfamiliar but comforting. He ran his hand along the windowsill and caught his reflection in the glass, wrinkled, weathered, but standing tall. For years, this room had only existed in his dreams, a place where he could rest without fear, where the ghosts of yesterday couldn't reach him. His phone, a simple flip model Michael had bought him, lay charging on the kitchen counter. A symbol of connection, of a world he thought had passed him by. That night, as he sat on the couch wrapped in a warm blanket, memories flooded back. The sound of his wife's laughter, the feel of Michael's small hand in his own, the smell of pine needles on summer evenings. Tears came unbidden, but they were different now, cleansing, not crushing. He whispered a prayer for forgiveness, for courage, and for the chance to make things right. Because sometimes, the longest journeys lead back home. And sometimes the hardest battles are won not with fists, but with love. Sleep came slowly that first night. Shadows from long ago danced across the walls, memories tangled like barbed wire in Hank's mind. He thought about the war, The jungles of Vietnam where death was as common as the sun, and the letters he never sent home. About the nights spent shivering in shelters, and the nights he ran from himself. Hank dreamed of his wife, Mary, her voice soft and steady, a reminder of better days. He dreamed of Michael, a boy with his father's eyes and his mother's smile, waiting patiently for a dad who never showed up. But morning brought no relief. The apartment was quiet, yet inside Hank's heart raced, tangled with regret and hope. At breakfast, the phone rang. It was Claire, her voice warm and familiar. "Michael wants to see you. There's something important he wants to share." Hank gripped the phone tightly, bracing himself. Because sometimes, the past isn't done with you, and neither is family. Michael met Hank at a quiet park bench overlooking the river. The sky was pale blue, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Between them lay a folded envelope, yellowed and tied with a faded ribbon. "This," Michael said softly, handing it over, "is from your wife." Hank's hands trembled as he broke the seal. Inside was Mary's handwriting, elegant, flowing, full of hope and heartbreak. "Henry, if you ever find this, know I never stopped believing in you. Michael and I carry your light, even when you couldn't. We made mistakes, but love was never one of them. Wherever you are, come home. We're waiting." Tears ran down Hank's cheeks, not for pain, but for the grace he never thought he deserved. Michael placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "She wanted you to have this. To know you're forgiven. To know you're still family." For the first time, Hank felt the heavy silence between loss and hope start to break. The days that followed were a delicate dance, two men learning how to be father and son again. Michael didn't push. Hank didn't rush. They shared breakfasts, walked by the river, and talked about everything and nothing. One afternoon, Michael handed Hank a small notebook. "I want to show you something." Inside were sketches, notes, plans, a vision Michael had held since childhood. A community center for veterans like Hank, a place to heal, reconnect, rebuild. Hank's eyes filled with tears. "You want me to help build this?" Michael nodded. "Because you taught me about sacrifice, kindness, and standing up for justice, even when the world turns its back." It wasn't just a business plan. It was a second chance, a way to turn pain into purpose. And for the first time in a long time, Hank felt ready. Building the community center wasn't easy. Hank faced his past every day, the bitterness, shame, and loneliness carved deep into his soul. Some nights he wanted to give up, to sink back into old habits and disappear. But Michael's faith never wavered. "Dad," he said one evening, as they pored over blueprints, "you've lived through hell and come out stronger. This isn't just about bricks and mortar. It's about justice, giving veterans and seniors a place to be seen, heard, and valued." Hank looked up, eyes glistening. "I'm scared, Michael. Scared I'll fail you again." Michael smiled gently. "You've already succeeded. You're here. You're fighting. That's all anyone can ask." Together, they faced the hard truths, about aging, about sacrifice, about forgiveness. And through it all, their bond grew stronger, built on honesty and love. Weeks later, Michael and Hank traveled to Willow Creek, the small town where Hank had once been a promising young man. The place had changed, but the memories remained like ghosts in the streets. They visited old friends, neighbors who remembered Hank before the fall, before the drinking, the silence, the years on the streets. Some greeted him with awkward smiles, others with open arms, but all carried stories of a man who had vanished too soon. At the local diner, an elderly woman approached. "Henry Whitaker, as I live and breathe. Thought you were lost to us forever." Hank's throat tightened. "I was." She squeezed his hand. "Not anymore." That day, amidst the faded storefronts and quiet corners, Hank realized that home wasn't just a place. It was the people who remembered you, who believed in your return. And with Michael by his side, he was ready to face whatever shadows remained. The community center's opening day was a crisp autumn morning. Veterans, seniors, families, faces marked by hardship but lit with hope, gathered in the renovated hall, a place where stories like Hank's could finally be told. Michael stood beside his father, pride shining in his eyes. Hank's voice trembled as he stepped to the microphone. "I wasn't always the man I wanted to be," he began, looking out at the crowd. "I lost my family, my home, my dignity. But thanks to my son, and to all of you, I've found a second chance." He spoke of sacrifice, not just his own, but the sacrifices made by those who serve, those who struggle in silence. "As we age," Hank said, "we learn that redemption isn't about forgetting the past. It's about facing it, forgiving ourselves, and building something better." The room erupted in applause, not just for the man before them, but for the message of hope and justice he carried. That day, a homeless man's journey became a beacon for many, a reminder that no life is ever truly lost. Weeks after the grand opening, Hank found himself walking the bustling streets of Boston, a man reborn but still deeply aware of those left behind. One chilly evening, he passed a young veteran sitting on a bench, clutching a tattered coat and a cardboard sign. Hank's heart clenched, a mirror of his own past. He approached quietly and sat beside the man. "Name's Henry," he said gently. The young veteran looked up, surprised. "Jake." They talked long into the night, about war, loss, and the fragile hope that someday things could be different. Before leaving, Hank reached into his pocket and handed Jake a folded note with the community center's address. "Come by any time. You're not alone." Jake nodded, eyes shining with gratitude. That small act, simple kindness born from experience, was Hank's true wealth. Because sometimes, the greatest fortune is the power to lift others. One evening, as the sun dipped low over Boston's skyline, Hank received a call that shook him. A local businessman who had exploited veterans and seniors for years was under investigation. Fraud, illegal evictions, the whole twisted works. Michael was already involved, using his company's resources to support the legal battle. "I remember when you told me about sacrifice and justice," Michael said during a late-night meeting in his office. "We're not just building a center. We're standing up for what's right." Hank nodded. "Karma's real. And sometimes it's patient." The community rallied, voices growing louder, stories spilling into newspapers and social media. The man was held accountable, facing consequences long overdue. Through it all, Hank realized that justice wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring balance, giving voice to those silenced for too long. And in that balance, healing could begin. Months later, as winter settled softly over the city, Hank sat by the fire in his modest apartment, a worn photo of Mary and Michael resting on the mantel. The community center buzzed with activity, a living testament to resilience and hope. Michael stopped by with a cup of coffee, their comfortable silence speaking volumes. "Dad," Michael said quietly, "you've come a long way." Hank smiled, eyes glistening. "Not just me. All of us. It's about the people we lift up along the way." They spoke of the future, plans to expand the center, to reach more lives, to build a legacy beyond wealth. And though the scars of the past lingered, Hank felt peace, real, hard-earned peace. Because sometimes, the greatest victories are quiet, and they live inside the heart. Years later, an older Hank stood on a wooden pier at dawn, the mist rising off the river like a whispered promise. Behind him, the community center buzzed softly with morning activity, veterans laughing, seniors sharing stories, children learning to dream. Michael joined him, handing over a worn baseball bat, one just like the one Hank once held in his son's small hands. "Ready for one last game?" Michael asked. Hank smiled, eyes shimmering with tears and memories. "Always." They laughed, and the bat swung through the crisp air, a symbol of second chances, of family reclaimed and lives rebuilt. As the sun rose over the town that had seen broken dreams and newfound hope, Hank whispered into the wind, "We're home." And in that moment, the story wasn't just about a homeless man or a millionaire. It was about the power of kindness, sacrifice, and the unbreakable ties that bind us all. Because no matter how far we fall, love has a way of bringing us back.